I was sitting in the doctor's waiting room when my phone rang. It was my only daughter, Angela. Her voice sounded distant, almost cold, as she said, "Mom, we're going on a trip to Europe tomorrow. I've already sold your beach house and your car. We needed the money. Bye." And just like that, she hung up. 45 years of raising her, sacrificing everything. And she discarded me like I was nothing. Yet I took a deep breath and smiled, because there was something my dear daughter didn't know. My name is Antonia Brooks. I'm 71 years old. Until that very moment, I believed I knew my daughter. I had become a widow 6 months ago. My husband, Robert, had passed away from a heart attack while we were eating breakfast, as we had done every morning for 45 years. That morning, he served me coffee with cream and toast. As always, he kissed my forehead and said, "Good morning, my love." Those were his last words. Since then, Angela had seemed more present in my life, or so I thought. She visited 3 times a week, helped with funeral arrangements, and even accompanied me to the grocery store. She suggested I see a doctor for a general checkup, saying with that familiar smile, "Mom, you need to take better care of yourself now that you're alone." I believed it was love. Now I realized it was convenience. The beach house had been our sanctuary for years. Robert and I bought it when Angela was 15, with great effort and sacrifice. Every summer, we'd go there, creating memories, celebrating birthdays and Christmases. Angela brought her boyfriends, and later, her husband Edward. I cooked for everyone, cleaned, did the laundry. It was our family tradition. I never imagined she'd see it as just money. And the car, that old Ford pickup truck, Robert cared for like his own child. He washed it every Sunday, changed the oil religiously, and always parked it in the same spot under the shade of the tree. Angela knew what that truck meant to me. It was the last piece of him I had. His scent lingered on the seats. After she hung up, I remained on that uncomfortable green plastic chair, surrounded by other patients. For the first time in months, I didn't cry. Something strange stirred within me. A calm I hadn't felt since Robert's death. In that moment, I remembered something I had nearly forgotten. 3 days before he died, Robert handed me a manila envelope. "Antonia, put this in the drawer of your dresser. If something happens to me, open it after a while, but only when you feel ready." I had put it away, barely thinking of it. After the funeral, overwhelmed with grief and arrangements, I simply forgot. But there it was, waiting for me at home. The nurse called me in. The doctor examined me and said I was in good health for my age, only needing more rest and better nutrition. I nodded and smiled, but my thoughts were elsewhere, on that envelope, on Angela's cold words, and on Edward, who was probably behind it all. He had never liked me, always seeing me as a nuisance. I left the office and walked slowly to the bus stop. No car anymore, according to Angela. Yet as I waited, I couldn't help but smile. There was a certain poetry in it all. My daughter thought she had left me with nothing, but she didn't know that Robert, my dear Robert, was always a man who planned ahead. The bus arrived, and I sat by the window, watching the city pass. The houses, the shops, the people rushing along, each with their own tragedies, their own secrets. I had my own too, and I was about to uncover them. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Inside were several documents. Robert had written my name neatly on the front. I sat on the bed we had shared for so many years and took a deep breath. Darkness was falling outside, and the house was filling with those familiar shadows that no longer scared me stretched across the walls. I opened the envelope slowly, as if unwrapping a long-forgotten gift. Inside, everything I thought I knew about my life shifted. Legal documents, property deeds, bank certificates, and a handwritten letter from Robert awaited me. My eyes filled with tears as I read his familiar handwriting. "My dear Antonia, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. Forgive me for not telling you everything while I was alive, but I wanted to protect you from worries. Over the years, I invested our savings in properties and businesses. We don't just have the beach house. We have 6 other properties, including the apartment building where Angela and Edward live. We also have shares in 3 companies that are worth more than you can imagine. You are rich, my love. You always were rich, but now you are on paper too. My hands trembled as I sifted through the documents. Deeds to houses in various city neighborhoods, a downtown condo, a small coastal motel, and yes, the 20-story apartment building where my daughter resided. Robert had been the silent owner for the past 10 years, placing everything under a company I had never known about. According to the papers, I was now the sole heir of that company. Bank statements for accounts I had never seen revealed numbers so vast they seemed unreal. Robert, a humble bus driver for 40 years, had secretly mastered investment and multiplication of our savings. Every sacrifice, every penny saved, had been quietly grown into a fortune I had never imagined. In the letter, Robert explained the secrecy. He wanted me protected from money worries, and, importantly, he wanted Angela unaware of the true scale of our wealth. Our daughter Antonia, if she knew we had so much, her attitude would change. I want her to love us for who we are, not what we have. Irony dripped from every line. Angela had left us believing we were destitute when in fact we had everything. That night, sleep eluded me. I wandered through the house, touching the old furniture, the little knickknacks Angela always mocked as outdated. I lingered on the family photos, especially the one of Angela at 5, perched on Robert's lap, laughing with pure joy. When did that sweet, innocent girl become so calculating, so cold? The next morning, the phone rang. It was Angela again. Her voice, once sharp and distant, now sounded softer, but I had learned to read the subtleties behind those tones. Mom, how are you? We've already transferred the money from the house and the car. Your share is in your account. It's not much, but it should help you for a few months while you look for something smaller. My share? I asked calmly, keeping my voice measured. Yes, Mom. We gave you 30%. That's fair, right? We need the rest for our investment in Europe. Edward has an incredible business opportunity over there. 30% of my own things. How generous, I said softly. And when do you leave? This afternoon. Our bags are packed. We'll be gone for at least 6 months, maybe more if the business goes well. Don't worry, Mom. When we get back, we'll help you find a small apartment. Something that fits your needs. Fits my needs, I repeated, tasting the absurdity in her words. Okay, Angela, have a safe trip. Oh, Mom, I knew you'd understand. You've always been so compassionate. We love you so much. And she hung up. I stood there with the phone in my hand, and for the first time in months, I laughed. Laughed like I hadn't since Robert died. The situation was absurd, almost comical. My daughter had stolen from me, kicked me out of my own house, and spoken with unbearable condescension, all to fund a European adventure that would likely collapse under its own arrogance. But it wasn't the money that mattered most. It was the casual ease with which she had tried to erase me. 45 years of my life dedicated to her, filled with sacrifice and unconditional love, and she tried to discard me with a single phone call. Yet in that moment, a strange clarity settled over me. I understood something profound. The power had never been hers. It had always been mine. Widow living quietly, forgotten by her only daughter. But in reality, I was orchestrating something much greater. While Angela was off in Europe spending money that wasn't hers, I was quietly reclaiming everything she thought she'd stolen. That 2-minute phone call had cut deeper than I wanted to admit. The cruelty of it wasn't in the money or the house, but in how quickly she had erased me. Still, I refused to let bitterness consume me. I checked my bank account online. The share they deposited looked generous on the surface, but it was an insult. The beach house had been sold far below its worth, likely out of desperation. Robert's beloved truck had gone for next to nothing. That afternoon, I stood by the window and watched Angela and Edward load their suitcases into a cab. 2 oversized cases for him, 1 expensive-looking carry-on for her. They laughed, kissed, and spoke excitedly about their trip, looking like teenagers embarking on some grand adventure. They didn't once glance toward my window. They didn't say goodbye. When the cab finally disappeared around the corner, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea and spread Robert's documents across the table. I knew I had decisions to make. I could call a lawyer, reverse the sales, and reclaim everything. But I wanted something more deliberate. Something that would teach them a lesson they'd never forget. I called Mr. Peterson, the lawyer who had handled Robert's affairs. He had been kind after the funeral, offering help if I ever needed it. I did. Mrs. Brooks, it's good to hear from you. How are you? I'm doing well, Mr. Peterson. I need to see you urgently. I found some documents from Robert that I don't fully understand. Of course. You can come to my office tomorrow morning. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. In my dreams, Robert sat in his favorite chair, reading the newspaper as he always did. When he saw me, he smiled. It's about time, my love, he said. It's about time you stood up for yourself. I woke with a new kind of energy. Not happiness exactly, but something steady and bright. Determination. For the first time since Robert's death, I had purpose. The next morning, I dressed with care, my wine-colored dress, the one Robert loved, the one that made me feel elegant. I styled my hair, applied light makeup, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw her again. The woman I had been before grief and loss had hollowed me out. Peterson's office sat in an old downtown building with marble floors and tall windows. He greeted me warmly, but when I showed him the documents, his face changed completely. Mrs. Brooks, this is far more than I expected. Robert was an exceptionally smart man. According to these papers, you are the owner of... I know, Mr. Peterson, I interrupted. I've reviewed them. What I need to know is what I can do legally. He explained that everything was legitimate. I was the rightful owner of every listed property. Then he confirmed what I already suspected. The sale of the beach house had been illegal. We can recover it immediately, he said. And we can take legal action against your daughter for fraud. And pause. No, I said firmly. I don't want legal action. I want to do this differently, quietly. Can you help me? He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Of course. You're my client. What do you need? I need you to discreetly recover the beach house and nullify that fraudulent sale. And I need full control of every property, especially the apartment building where my daughter lives. I understand. It'll take a few weeks, but it's entirely possible. Good. And one more thing, Mr. Peterson, I don't want anyone to know I'm behind this. Not yet. When I left his office, the city looked the same. Crowded streets, traffic, people rushing to work. But to me, the world had shifted. I wasn't the same woman who had walked in. I was awake now, finally. In the weeks that followed, I lived two lives. To the world, I was still the quiet widow. But behind closed doors, I was methodically taking back everything Robert had built and everything Angela had so carelessly thrown away. And every day that passed, I felt Robert closer to me, as if he were watching, proud that I was finally learning to fight. Quiet satisfaction. The beach house, once the scene of so many family memories, was mine again. I felt the weight of Robert's planning, the years of foresight he had silently carried, and a small, private joy swelled inside me. Angela and Edward believed they had robbed me, but in reality, they had walked right into a web I was now quietly controlling. Back in the city, I resumed my morning routine, appearing the fragile widow to neighbors and shopkeepers alike. Every nod, every sympathetic glance reinforced the illusion. Aurora, my lifelong neighbor, continued to check on me, offering help and compassion, unaware that behind my polite smiles, I was plotting a quiet reclamation. Mr. Peterson called midweek with updates. Mrs. Brooks, good news, I nullified the sale of the beach house. The buyers were unaware the transaction was fraudulent, so they received refunds smoothly. The house is officially yours again. Excellent, Mr. Peterson, and the apartment building? I asked. That one's more complex. Legally, you've always been the owner through the company, but we need to make administrative changes for you to have direct control. That should take another 2 weeks. Perfect. Keep me informed. After hanging up, I sipped my coffee, thinking about Angela. She had been in Europe for 3 weeks with no word, no calls, no messages, not even a postcard. To her, I had ceased to exist the moment she secured the money she needed. But soon, that would change. I decided to visit the beach house. Taking the same bus route, Robert and I had traveled countless times. I approached the familiar cream-colored house with its porch overlooking the ocean. Potted plants adorned the steps, but otherwise, everything remained as I remembered. I sat on the curb across the street for an hour, watching the waves, listening to the distant cries of seagulls, and letting memories flood me. Summer afternoons when Angela was a child building sandcastles, Robert grilling fish while I prepared salads. The house full of laughter, friends, and later Edward. All of it now reduced by her actions to a mere transaction. An older gentleman came out, noticing me. "Are you okay, ma'am?" he asked. "Yes, thank you. I'm just remembering," I replied. I knew the former owners well. It's a shame what happened. They told us the elderly lady needed to sell quickly, and it seemed like a steal. But we had to return it when we realized the sale wasn't legal. Did you know them personally? No, through intermediaries. The daughter handled everything because the mother couldn't. How sad, he murmured. If only he knew how truly sad it had been, I thought. Well, I'm glad everything worked out, he added. We'll have to find another house. We liked this one very much. I left with a private triumphant calm. The house was back where it belonged, the memories intact in my mind, and the knowledge that Angela's assumptions of power over me were utterly false. For the first time in months, I felt fully in control, quiet, patient, and ready for the next steps in reclaiming what was rightfully mine, just as he had intended. The night air was cool, and the sound of crickets filled the silence around me. I took a slow sip of tea and felt the weight of satisfaction settle quietly in my chest. Robert had prepared everything, not just the financial security, but a path toward justice, one that didn't need anger or revenge, only patience and precision. Angela's lies no longer burned as sharply as they once had. The wound she'd left was still there, but it had hardened into something stronger, resolve. She had used my grief to manipulate me, spun a story of illness to make me seem weak, helpless. To her, I had become a burden, a problem that needed to be cleared away so she could live freely. But soon, she would see that I had never been weak. The next morning, I called Mr. Peterson again. "Mr. Peterson, I need your help with one more matter," I said. "Robert's truck. I want it back." He hesitated. "That will be difficult, Mrs. Brooks. The truck was in your name. But your daughter held a power of attorney, allowing her to sell it." I frowned. "How is that possible?" He paused, then replied, "You signed the document a few months after Robert's passing. Do you remember? She must have told you it was for inheritance procedures." The memory struck me like a cold wave. I could see Angela standing in my living room, handing me a stack of papers, assuring me they were just for formalities. I had been too lost in grief, too trusting to question her. I had signed without reading. "I understand," I said slowly. "Is there any legal path to reclaim it?" "We can try, but it will be complicated. We'd need to prove deception or coercion." "Then do it," I said. "I want everything that was taken from me returned." Over the following weeks, my life split neatly into two halves. In the mornings, I was the quiet widow, polite and reserved, offering small smiles to the neighbors who pitied me. In the afternoons, I became someone else entirely, a strategist. I studied financial statements, reviewed property deeds, and held long calls with Mr. Peterson. Robert's records revealed a mind sharper than I'd ever known. His investments were deliberate, his timing flawless. The building where Angela lived wasn't just profitable, it was located in a rapidly growing district, its value climbing year after year. In those documents, I also found something interesting. Edward, my son-in-law, was drowning in debt. He had taken out multiple loans using the apartment as collateral, not realizing that he didn't legally own it. When the banks discovered the truth, his entire financial facade would crumble. By the end of the month, Mr. Peterson called with the results of his work. "Mrs. Brooks, everything is finalized. You now have full control of your properties." And we recovered Robert's truck as well. The buyer turned out to be an old acquaintance of mine. Once I explained the situation, he agreed to return it for a small settlement. "Excellent work, Mr. Peterson," I said. "Now I have one last request. Send a letter to my daughter." "A letter?" he asked cautiously. "What kind of letter?" "An eviction notice." There was a long silence. "Mrs. Brooks, are you sure you want to take that step?" "Completely," I said evenly. "She made her choice. Now she'll learn what it means to face the consequences." "Do you want me to send it to her in Europe?" "No," I replied. "Deliver it when she returns. I have a feeling that will be sooner than expected." My intuition was right. That very afternoon, Aurora came rushing to my gate, breathless with gossip. "Antonia, have you heard? Edward's in trouble with the bank." My brother-in-law works there. He said the bank's investigating loans he took using the apartment as collateral, but it turns out it isn't his property. Really? I said, hiding the satisfaction in my voice. Yes, and Angela didn't know. She's flying back from Europe to deal with it. Apparently Edward lied about the business there. There was no investment, no opportunity. He just wanted to escape his debts. What a shame, I said softly. But inside, I felt the quiet, controlled thrill of justice falling into place. Everything was unfolding exactly as Robert would have wanted. Angela had betrayed me for a man who was now betraying her. That night, as I sat on the porch beneath the stars, I thought of Robert's words. He used to say that stars were the souls of those who'd lived full, honest lives, watching over the ones they loved. If he was up there, I knew he was smiling, because his plan, his patience, his love were guiding every step of what was happening below. Out the window, at the same street where I had once watched her drive away, with her suitcases, full of confidence and contempt. Now she would walk back down that road alone, stripped of everything she thought she controlled. I set the table carefully. Tea, 2 cups, nothing else. I didn't intend to offer comfort. I intended to offer reality. Half an hour later, I saw her through the curtains. Angela looked like a shadow of herself. Hair unkempt, eyes swollen, clothes wrinkled, movements slow. She hesitated before knocking, as if she already knew that the woman behind the door was no longer the same mother she had once manipulated. When I opened the door, she froze. "Mom," she whispered. "Angela," I said evenly. "Come in." She walked inside and looked around. Everything was the same. The furniture, the photos, the quiet order. But there was a different air in the room now. Not grief, not weakness, authority. She sat down without waiting for me to offer, and for a moment, she said nothing. Her hands were shaking. "Mom, I don't know what to do, Edward. He left me. He took everything. He said he was going to meet an investor in Paris. He ran away with a woman he met there. I came back, and when I tried to call him, the number was disconnected. Then this letter came." She slid the eviction notice across the table, as if expecting me to explain it away. I picked it up, adjusted my glasses, and read it slowly, though I already knew every word. "It looks legitimate," I said calmly. 30 days to vacate. It seems the owner has other plans for the property. Her voice cracked. "But Mom, we've been living there for years. We paid rent on time. How could this happen?" "Maybe," I said, "the owner changed." She looked at me confused. "What do you mean?" I placed the letter down carefully, looked her straight in the eyes and said, "I mean that the building is mine. It always was." Her face went pale. "What?" "Your father was the real owner, Angela. He left everything to me. You sold the beach house and the truck illegally, but the company that owns your apartment building, Robert Investments Inc., is mine. So yes, that letter you're holding, it came from me." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Finally, she whispered, You knew all along." "I found out after you left," I said. "After your little phone call. After you sold what wasn't yours. After you decided your mother was disposable." "Mom, No," I interrupted. "You don't get to apologize because you're losing. You get to think about what you did. About the lies you told. About the way you treated your own mother." Tears began to stream down her face. I didn't know what Edward was doing. He said we needed money for the business. He said you'd be fine, that you didn't need the beach house. I thought, "You didn't think," I cut in coldly. "You believed what you wanted to believe because it was convenient. Because greed is easier than gratitude." She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. "I've lost everything." "No," I said. "You've lost what never truly belonged to you. That's different." For a long while, we sat in silence, her crying softly, me watching her with a strange calm I hadn't known I was capable of. After a few minutes, I spoke again. "You have 30 days, Angela. I suggest you use them wisely. Find a job. Find a place to stay. Find a way to live without taking from others." She looked up, desperate. "You're really going to throw me out?" "I'm not throwing you out," I said. "I'm giving you what you gave me. Distance." Her lip trembled. "Mom, please, don't beg," I said. "It doesn't suit you. You're strong, remember? You told me that when you hung up that day. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. She sat frozen for a moment, then slowly rose, clutching the letter like a death sentence. At the door, she turned one last time. Mom, is there any way you could forgive me? I looked at her for a long second. Forgiveness isn't something you ask for, Angela. It's something you earn. Then I closed the door. Inside, the silence felt heavier, but not painful. It was the silence of completion. Justice, not revenge. Balance restored. I sat back down, poured myself another cup of tea, and whispered toward the ceiling. It's done, Robert. She's finally learned. I stood before the mirror and studied my face. I had to be flawless for this performance. I chose my most conservative gray dress, tied my hair in a neat bun, and practiced the expression of a worried, resigned mother. When Angela arrived, she would see exactly what she expected. A poor, vulnerable widow abandoned by her daughter. She came an hour later. I was struck by how awful she looked. Thinner, with deep dark circles under bloodshot eyes. Her once expensive clothes wrinkled and untidy. Mom, she said, and for a heartbeat I thought she would step forward and embrace me. She stopped, as if the memory of how things had ended between us held her back. Come in, honey. Would you like some coffee? Yes, please. We sat at the same kitchen table where I had spread out Robert's papers weeks before. Angela looked small in the chair, lost in a way that echoed the child she once had been, the child who came to me with scraped knees and schoolyard troubles. Mom, I'm so sorry for how I left, she began. I know I didn't treat you well. It's in the past, I said. No, it's not. I treated you badly. I said horrible things. And now I have no one. Her voice broke. What happened with Edward? He left me for a 25-year-old waitress in Paris, she whispered. There was never any business. It was all a lie. He wanted to escape his debts and use the money from selling the house to fund his escape. I wanted to reach across the table, hold her, tell her everything would be all right. Then I remembered the coldness in her voice that day at the doctor's office, the casual way she discarded me. I remembered 45 years of sacrifice turned into 2 minutes of dismissal. Did you speak to a lawyer about the letter? I asked. I don't have money for a lawyer, Mom. We spent everything in Europe. Edward took what little was left when he ran off with that woman. So what will you do? I don't know. Maybe I could stay with you a little while, just until I find work and can get a small place. There it was, after selling my house and truck, after treating me like trash. She wanted me to rescue her. She wanted the poor widow she'd manufactured to save her from the consequences of her own choices. Of course, honey, this will always be your home. She looked at me, surprised, as if I'd handed her mercy on a silver platter. Really, Mom, after everything? You are my daughter, Angela. That will never change. She rose and hugged me, a desperate, clinging embrace from someone drowning. I returned it, but not with the old, unconditional love. There was calculation in my arms now, a measured response, comfort with intent. Thank you, Mom. I promise I'll find a job soon. I won't be a burden. Rest, recover, then we'll see your options. Angela left to collect a few things from her apartment. I remained in the kitchen, absorbing how effortlessly she had fallen into the role I'd crafted, broken, helpless, unsuspecting. To her, I was still the forlorn mother who needed compassion. This was only the opening move. Letting her live with me would create the perfect stage for the next phase. I would let her settle in, feel safe, and had vanished from the face of the earth. I listened to her in silence, watching how every sentence, every confession stripped away another layer of her arrogance. The once proud daughter who had thought herself smarter, stronger, and more modern than everyone else now sat across from me, broken, frightened, and humbled. When dinner was over, Angela quietly washed the dishes. I could see the tremor in her hands, the heaviness of shame hanging over her shoulders. I poured myself a small glass of Robert's wine and stepped onto the porch. The night was still, the kind of calm that carries a whisper of anticipation. My plan was unfolding exactly as Robert had predicted. By the next morning, Angela and I were on our way to the bank. She clutched the letter and the small key as if they were her last hope. Do you think Dad left something valuable there? She asked. I don't know, honey, I replied softly. Your father was always full of surprises. At the central bank. The clerk verified our IDs and escorted us to a private booth. When the deposit box was opened, I saw a small stack of papers, a sealed envelope, and a velvet pouch. Angela's eyes widened with anticipation. I reached for the papers first, a set of documents detailing ownership transfers, investment certificates, and one notarized letter. All of them bore Robert's signature. "What is all this?" Angela asked. "These," I said carefully, "are the legal titles to several of your father's remaining investments. It seems he secured them long before everything that happened." Angela leaned closer. "And the envelope?" I opened it slowly. Inside was a short note in Robert's familiar handwriting. "Antonia, if our daughter has returned to you in need, this is her second chance. What you choose to do with what's in this box will define how much she's learned about love, loyalty, and consequence. Trust your heart, but don't forget your mind." My eyes lingered on those words. Trust your heart, but don't forget your mind. Angela, oblivious to the gravity of the message, was already reaching for the velvet pouch. Inside were 3 gold coins and a small diamond ring. Nothing compared to what she'd lost, but to her it was a symbol of hope. "Mom, maybe we can sell these," she said eagerly. "They might help with the debts." I looked at her, my expression calm but unreadable. "Perhaps," I said, "but not yet. Your father wanted me to use this wisely, and that's exactly." I nodded and smiled where appropriate, but inside, my mind was calculating every move. Mr. Peterson called later that evening. "Mrs. Brooks, I've gathered the preliminary information you requested. Edward's debts are worse than we thought. Multiple loans under his name, several forged under your daughter's. Legally, we can separate her liability, but it will take time and proof of fraud." "That's fine," I said. "Proceed quietly. I'll manage her side of things here." "Understood." "And Mrs. Brooks," he added after a pause, "are you sure you're not being too harsh on her?" I smiled faintly. "Mr. Peterson, I'm not punishing my daughter. I'm educating her. There's a difference." When I hung up, I went to Angela's room. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the ceiling. "Mom," she whispered, "do you think things will ever be normal again?" "Normal," I repeated softly. "That depends, dear. Sometimes we have to lose everything to understand what was truly ours." She nodded, not really understanding, and soon drifted into uneasy sleep. I stood in the doorway for a long while, watching her, my daughter, my betrayer, my pupil. Tomorrow I would begin teaching her the final lesson, that redemption doesn't come from comfort, but from confrontation with the truth. Edward had vanished. Perfect. True to form, he had fled like the coward he always was, leaving Angela to face the consequences of her actions alone. In a way, his disappearance had done me a favor. My daughter was now feeling for the first time the same despair and betrayal I had endured when Edward abandoned me. She had trusted him completely, and he had discarded her as easily as he had discarded me. "I'm so sorry, honey," I said softly, keeping my voice full of sympathy. "I didn't know things were this bad, Mom," she admitted, tears brimming. "I know," I replied. "I thought Edward loved me, that we were going to build something together. But it turns out I was just a convenient path for him to take money and documents." Her voice broke as she confessed the depth of her misjudgment. Angela began crying again, soft, desperate sobs that filled the room. How could I have been so patient, so silent, and yet so observant? How could I have allowed her to remain blind to his true nature? It was tempting to tell her that I had seen it from the beginning, that I had tried to warn her. But that would have broken my carefully maintained facade, the one of a loving, compassionate, and vulnerable mother. "Love can be blinding sometimes, honey. Don't blame yourself," I said gently, letting her believe I had just discovered the chaos alongside her. "But Mom," she said, her voice trembling, "I didn't just ruin my life. I ruined yours too. I treated you horribly. I took your house, your truck, your belongings, all to give them to someone who abandoned me at the first opportunity. Now we're both left with nothing." "It's in the past, Angela. We'll be okay," I said, keeping my tone calm, concealing the truth of our fortune. "No, it's not. We're both in trouble because of my mistakes. You lost everything Dad left you, and I lost my marriage, my future. Now we're 2 poor women trying to survive." If only she knew, I thought, that at this very moment I possessed more wealth than she could ever imagine. I was the owner of the building she lived in. All her financial and legal problems could be resolved with a single phone call. But the timing had to be perfect. She could not yet know. The next morning, we went to the bank. Angela's nervous hope was palpable. Her hands fidgeted, and she kept glancing around as though someone might judge her for not knowing what to do. I maintained my act perfectly, a confused widow overwhelmed by finance, unsure of even the most basic procedures. The bank employee led us to the safety deposit boxes, verified my identification, and opened box number 247. Inside lay a dazzling array of jewels, rings, necklaces, bracelets, earrings. Some pieces were old family heirlooms from Robert's side. Others were new, clearly acquired with discretion and foresight. Alongside them was a small letter explaining the provenance and approximate value of each item. Angela gasped, "Mom, this must be worth a fortune." I glanced at her, my expression careful. "You think so? Look at this emerald in this pearl necklace. Your father saved a treasure here." According to Robert's note, the jewels were worth approximately $200,000. A substantial sum, certainly, but a fraction of the wealth I truly controlled. It was like discovering a few coins under the sofa, when in reality, a hidden fortune waited silently in the background. "What do we do with this, Mom?" Angela asked, her voice anxious. "They're family memories, honey. They carry history, not just value," I replied, maintaining the guise of the cautious, sentimental widow. "But Mom, we could sell some of these pieces. With this money, you could reclaim the beach house, and I could pay off Edward's debts." There it was again. Even now, her instinct was to fix Edward's mess, to solve the problems he created, rather than considering her own responsibility or learning from the consequences. She hadn't learned a thing yet. "Are you sure you want to use your father's inheritance to pay Edward's debts?" I asked, forcing a deliberate pause. "What other option do I have, Mom? If I don't pay soon, the banks are going to foreclose on everything. Technically, I don't own anything. Everything was in Edward's name." I leaned back slightly, letting her see only the concern I wanted her to see. "Think carefully, honey. Once you sell these jewels, I can't get a job with all these legal claims pending. No employer will touch someone with this many financial complications," she admitted, her panic mixing with frustration. We carried the jewels home. Angela spread them meticulously across the kitchen table, examining each one, noting its approximate value, and determining which she would sell and which to keep. Watching her reduce decades of family history into numbers and spreadsheets was almost painful, but also perfectly enlightening. Each coin, each gem, was being measured not for its history or memory, but for its utility, its immediate monetary value. "Mom," she said one afternoon, counting bills she had already withdrawn for sale, "I think I can raise about $180,000 from these jewels. It's less than I hoped, but it will cover the most urgent debts." I watched her, silently impressed by her diligence, yet quietly amused by her ignorance. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked again, keeping my voice soft, sorrowful. "I have no choice," she said, her voice tight with desperation. "If I don't pay something soon, they'll seize everything. Even this house could be at risk if they discover any legal connection I have to the properties." How ironic, I thought. She believed she was salvaging her life, but in truth, she was only following the carefully constructed path I had set before her. Every anxious decision, every frantic calculation, every fearful glance would teach her more than money ever could. The value of responsibility, the cost of blind trust, and the weight of consequence. Angela was anxious, her eyes darting nervously over the scattered bills, loan documents, and the jewels laid out on the kitchen table. She was trying to figure out how to prioritize the debts of a man who had abandoned her, using money from the very jewels that belonged to the man who had quietly built the fortune that could have saved her from this mess. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had once thought only of herself was now desperately trying to untangle the chaos her decisions had caused. "And how are you going to decide which debts to pay first?" I asked gently, keeping my voice calm and measured. I don't know," she admitted, her fingers trembling slightly as she held a stack of papers. "That's okay," I said, taking the opportunity to guide her without revealing too much. "I spoke to a free financial advisor at the bank today. She said the debts with real collateral, those that can lead to foreclosure, have to come first. Those are the ones that could affect property immediately. Everything else comes later. Angela nodded, absorbing the advice like a sponge. The woman before me was different from the girl who had coldly sold my beach house and my truck. These weeks of suffering, of being left alone by a man she trusted, had forced her to mature. She was more responsible now, but also more fragile. Fragile in the way only someone who has lost everything can be. That night, as Angela organized the debt documents with meticulous care, my phone rang. It was Mr. Peterson. Mrs. Brooks, he said, his voice serious. I've completed the investigation into Edward's debts. The situation is worse than I imagined. How much worse? I asked, bracing myself. He owes over $200,000 to several banks, and there are additional debts with private lenders. The concerning part is that he used falsified documents bearing your daughter's signature for some of these loans. Legally, she's responsible. A tight knot formed in my chest. This was exactly why my plan had to be precise. Can she be freed from these debts? I asked. It's possible, but it would require proving she didn't know about the falsified documents. It will be a long, expensive, and complicated process. How expensive? For a competent lawyer specializing in these cases, probably $50,000, and even then, there's no guarantee of success. I nodded, thinking through the next moves carefully. Understood, and if she just pays the debts? That would be the fastest solution, but I doubt she has access to that kind of money. Very well, Mr. Peterson. Prepare all the necessary documents to remove my daughter's legal responsibility for these debts. But don't tell her anything yet. I want her to learn the full lesson first. He paused. I understand, Mrs. Brooks. May I ask what your plan is? I will do whatever is necessary to protect my daughter, but it must be handled in a very specific way. Timing is everything. After hanging up, I found Angela in the living room, staring at the jewels with a sorrowful expression. Her hands were clenched around a delicate bracelet, her mind clearly elsewhere. She looked like a child who had broken her favorite toy and had no idea how to fix it. What are you thinking about, honey? I asked softly. About Dad, she whispered. About how disappointed he would be if he could see me now. Your father loved you very much, Angela. He would understand, I promise, I said, keeping my tone gentle. No, Mom, she said, shaking her head. He taught me to be responsible, to value family, not to be selfish. And I did the exact opposite. I abandoned you for a man who turned out to be a liar. I sold our family memories for money. I ruined everything he built. I let her speak, letting her unburden herself. This was what I had been waiting for. Genuine recognition of her actions. True remorse. People make mistakes, honey, I said finally. But the important thing is to learn from them. How do I learn, Mom? How do I fix all this? Her voice trembled with desperation, finally open to guidance. There it was, the question I had been waiting for. Angela was ready to confront the consequences of her choices, but it still wasn't time to reveal the final cards. First, she had to fully hit rock bottom. Over the next few days, Angela began selling most of the jewels, keeping only the engagement ring Robert had given me and a small necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. I watched carefully as she visited jewelry stores, researched fair prices, and negotiated with buyers. Each sale was painful for her, each transaction a harsh lesson in responsibility. She was converting decades of family history into cold, hard cash, and I let her feel the weight of every decision. Mom, I got $180,000 for the jewels, she said one afternoon, counting bills spread across the kitchen table. It's less than I expected, but it should cover the most urgent debts. I kept my expression sorrowful, sympathetic, but internally, I was calculating the perfect timing of the next step. Are you sure you want to do this? I asked, careful to keep the tone of concern. I have no choice. If I don't pay something soon, they'll foreclose on everything. Even this house could be at risk if they discover any legal connection I have to the properties. The irony of the situation was delicious. Angela was now worried about losing a house that I owned, paying the debts of a man who had abandoned her, with money from jewels that belonged to the same man who had built the fortune that could have solved every one of her problems. And in that moment, I knew my plan was working perfectly. She was learning the price of her choices, and the lesson was just beginning. "And how are you going to decide which debts to pay first?" I asked, watching her hands tremble slightly as she rearranged the pile of papers spread across the kitchen table. "I talked to a free financial advisor at the bank," she replied, sounding more composed than I expected. "She told me to prioritize the debts that have real collateral, those that can affect property or lead to immediate foreclosure." I nodded, silently studying her. Angela had changed. The woman who once sold my things without a second thought was now meticulously analyzing every financial decision she made. The same arrogance that had driven her to follow Edward blindly was gone, replaced by a fragile caution born from pain. Suffering had carved something new into her, responsibility, but it had also made her delicate, uncertain, and afraid to trust her own judgment. That night, while she sat at the table organizing debt documents into labeled folders, I received a call. "Mr. Peterson." His timing, as always, was impeccable. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, his tone sharp, efficient. "I have important news. We managed to locate Edward." My heart skipped, but my voice stayed steady. "Where is he?" "In Paris, just as your daughter suspected. But here's the interesting part. He's trying to get French residency through a fake marriage with that young woman your daughter mentioned." "A fake marriage?" "Yes. Apparently, the girl needs papers, and he needs a way to stay in Europe without being deported. But that's not the most important part. We found solid evidence that he deliberately falsified your daughter's documents with the intention of fleeing the country." I felt my pulse quicken. "Are you certain?" "Completely. With this evidence, we can prove fraud and coercion. That means your daughter can be cleared of all her debts. Legally, she won't have to pay anything Edward did behind her back." It was perfect. Every piece of my plan was falling into place. I now had the key to saving Angela from financial ruin, without her ever knowing that I had the power or the means to do it. "Mr. Peterson," I said, "start the legal process immediately. Don't tell my daughter anything yet. I want it handled quietly, and I don't want her to have false hope until it's all over." "Understood. It should take about 3 weeks, maybe a month." "Perfect." I hung up the phone and turned. Angela was watching me from across the room, her brow slightly furrowed. "Who was that, Mom?" I smiled faintly. "A lady who was asking about Mrs. Davis, our neighbor on the corner. She had the wrong number." She accepted it easily. Lying had become second nature. Every day, I slipped more seamlessly between the roles I was playing. The humble, abandoned mother Angela believed me to be, and the powerful, calculating woman, quietly directing the reconstruction of her daughter's life. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Angela navigate the kind of decisions she had never faced before. How to stretch a small amount of money for groceries, how to negotiate with creditors, how to live with the gnawing uncertainty of not knowing what tomorrow would bring. It was cruel, yes, but it was necessary. One evening, she came home with swollen feet, her clothes damp from the evening rain. "Mom," she said, exhausted, "I went to 3 job interviews today. 2 of them told me they can't hire me because of the legal claims still pending. The 3rd offered me a part-time job cleaning offices at night." "Are you going to take it?" I asked. "I don't have a choice. It pays almost nothing, but it's something. At least I'll be working." I looked at her, this woman who had once worn designer clothes and hosted dinner parties, now preparing to scrub floors in silence while the world slept. My heart ached for her, but beneath that ache was pride. For the first time, Angela was facing reality without expecting anyone to rescue her. "Are you sure you can handle the work?" I asked. "I'll have to learn," she said simply. "I can't keep being a burden to you, Mom. It's bad enough you're letting me live here for free." "This is your home, Angela." She looked at me, her eyes filled with quiet shame. "No, Mom. This is your home. I'm here because of your generosity. But I won't stay forever. I need to stand on my own again." That night, while Angela left for her first cleaning shift, I sat alone in the kitchen, the quiet of the house pressing in around me. The sound of the clock was the only thing marking time. A little later, Aurora came by. She sat opposite me at the kitchen table, sipping the tea I had prepared, her eyes scanning the photographs on the wall. Pictures of Robert, of Angela as a child, of birthdays and beach trips that now seemed like relics from another life. Antonia, she began carefully, I have to ask you something. What is it? Did you know Angela was going to come back like this? In these conditions? I feigned confusion. What do you mean? Well, Aurora said, leaning forward. When she left, she was so confident, so full of herself. She talked about the great life she and Edward were going to have in Europe, about how successful he was. And now she's back, completely broken, working a cleaning job, living here again. It just feels strange, that's all. Life takes many turns, Aurora, I said softly. None of us know what tomorrow brings. Yes, she nodded, but there's something different about her. She's not the same Anne. Angela, she looks humbled, quieter, as if she's learned something very important. I stirred my tea slowly, hiding the faintest trace of a smile. Yes, I said. Maybe she has. It was time. After weeks of watching Angela struggle, work, and reflect on her mistakes, the moment had finally arrived to show her that she had survived the storm and that I had silently guided her toward a new understanding of life. Mrs. Brooks, the legal process is almost complete. Mr. Peterson said over the phone, we can officially get your daughter out of all of Edward's debts. She won't owe a single cent. A smile threatened to break across my face, but I held it back. Angela didn't need to know yet. She needed the lesson to settle fully first. I hung up and turned to the kitchen, where Angela was carefully folding the last of the clean office cloths she had brought home from her night shift. She looked exhausted, but her posture was different, straighter, steadier. There was pride in her movements, a quiet acknowledgement of her own effort and survival. Honey, I said softly, can you take a break for a minute? She looked up, startled. Yes, Mom. I walked over and poured us both a cup of tea, placing one in front of her. She accepted it with a small, almost shy smile. You know, Aurora came by earlier. I began, testing the waters. She said something that made me think. She noticed how different you are these past days. And she's right. You are different, not just tired or humbled, but stronger and wiser. Do you see that too? Angela stared at the tea in her hands for a long moment. Then she nodded, slowly. I think I do, Mom. I feel changed. Not just because of work, but because I had to face the truth. I had to see what it means to really lose everything. I reached out and touched her hand lightly. That's part of life, honey. The difference is whether you learn from it. And I think you have. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't of despair. They were of recognition, of accountability. Mom, I finally understand. I understand that love, family, and integrity matter more than all the money or possessions in the world. I see now that all the things I chased meant nothing if I didn't respect the people who truly cared for me. I nodded, holding back a lump in my throat. This was exactly what I had hoped for. The humility, the self-reflection, the acknowledgement of past mistakes. You've done very well, Angela, I said softly. And I've watched, quietly, as you learned something important. But there's one more piece of the puzzle. Her brow furrowed. One more? Yes, I said, leaning closer. Remember Edward's debts, the ones that have haunted you. I've been working behind the scenes. They're gone. You won't have to pay a single cent. Everything will be cleared legally. You don't have to worry about banks, loans, or collectors anymore. Angela's mouth fell open and her hands trembled slightly. All of them? Really? How is that possible? I smiled gently. Sometimes, honey, the people who love you most fight battles you don't even know about. You've learned responsibility and humility, and now the world will no longer punish you for someone else's wrongdoing. You've earned this, not because of luck, but because you faced reality and didn't give up. Tears streamed down her face freely now, and she wrapped her arms around me in a long, desperate hug. I hugged her back, this time without strategy, without calculation. This was the moment where love could simply exist, and I let it. I don't deserve this, Mom, she whispered into my shoulder. I don't deserve your forgiveness or this chance. You've shown me that you do, I murmured. Not by asking for it, but by proving that you can learn, change, and take responsibility. That is more valuable than any inheritance, any jewels, or any money in the world. For the first time in months, Angela rested her head on my shoulder without fear, without pretense. She was broken, yes, but she was learning, truly learning, the lessons she had refused to see before. And I knew, deep down, that the years ahead would be different. She would carry the wisdom of this experience with her, and perhaps, one day, she would understand just how carefully love can guide even when it seems absent. I held her tight, thinking of Robert, of all the plans we had made together, and of the quiet victories that were unfolding in ways only he and I could have imagined. This was the culmination of patience, of strategy, of maternal love, and for the first time in a long while, everything felt right. She has also recovered every property and asset that Edward tried to take from you. Legally, you are free from all of his actions. Your record will be cleared completely. Angela turned slowly toward me, her eyes full of disbelief. You did all that. You paid for everything. You cleared my name. I nodded quietly. Yes, but you never told me, she whispered, voice trembling. You just watched me fall apart, watched me work, cry, struggle. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because, I said gently, if I had told you then, none of this would have meant anything. You would have taken my help the same way you once took everything else, without understanding what it cost or what it was worth. I needed you to rediscover your strength before I gave you back your freedom. Angela pressed her trembling hands to her face. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she lowered her hands and looked at me with tear-filled eyes. Eyes that no longer carried arrogance or resentment, only humility. I don't know what to say, she murmured. There are no words, Mom. I don't deserve you. I reached across the table and took her hand firmly. You don't have to deserve me, Angela. You're my daughter. But you had to learn to deserve your own life again, to build it with dignity, not dependency. Mr. Peterson smiled faintly, closing the folders and giving us both a respectful nod. Ladies, I'll leave you two to talk. The paperwork is finalized. Miss Brooks, your debts are officially nullified. You are free to start over. As the door closed behind him, silence filled the office. Angela stared at the folders on the table, the physical proof of everything she had lost and everything she had regained. Mom, she said softly, her voice trembling. I thought I was alone. I thought you were just surviving beside me. But you were saving me the entire time. I smiled faintly. You were never alone, honey. Even when you turned your back on me, I never stopped being your mother. She reached across the table and took my hands, clutching them tightly. I don't know how to make this right. You already have, I whispered. You came back. You faced the truth. You worked, you struggled, and you didn't run away this time. That's all I ever wanted for you. To grow strong enough to face life on your own terms. Angela's tears fell freely now, but they were cleansing. A quiet release of everything she had carried. I love you, Mom, she said through a shaky breath. For the first time, I really understand what that means. I stood and moved around the table, pulling her into my arms. I love you too, my girl. And now, finally, you're ready to live, not as someone's wife or someone's daughter, but as yourself. We stayed like that for a long while, two women who had walked through betrayal, pride, loss, and finally found each other again, not through money or forgiveness alone, but through truth. When we left Mr. Peterson's office, the morning light fell softly on Angela's face. She looked different, not just older or wiser, but free. For the first time in years, she walked beside me, not ahead or behind, but as my equal. And in that moment, I knew my plan had worked, not as revenge, but as redemption. She had finally learned that love doesn't always mean rescuing someone. Sometimes it means letting them fall, so they can learn to stand. Aurora shook her head slowly, a mixture of admiration and disbelief in her eyes. Brilliant, because you saved your daughter and taught her a lesson she would never forget. Terrible, because you let her suffer so much before helping her. I sipped my tea, letting the warmth fill me as I considered her words. Yes, it was harsh, but it was necessary. If I had simply rescued her the moment she called, she would have repeated her mistakes. She needed to understand the value of effort, responsibility, and humility. She needed to feel what it meant to lose everything and then rebuild. Aurora nodded, clearly impressed, despite the moral weight of my actions. And she did. I can see it in her. Even her posture, her voice, the way she talks to you now, it's all changed. She's not just grateful, she's matured. Yes, I agreed softly. And she chose to continue her cleaning job, even knowing I could have solved every problem with a single phone call. That choice tells me she finally understands the dignity of work, the value of struggle, and the importance of earning respect, rather than just expecting it. Aurora smiled knowingly. It's rare to see a daughter come back stronger than before, especially after everything she did. You did more than save her, Antonia. You shaped her into someone who will never take life or family for granted again. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. That was the goal. I wanted her to know that love is not a safety net that excuses irresponsibility. It is the foundation that supports growth, understanding, and accountability. She had to learn that while she could fall, she could also rise, but only if she faced reality herself. Aurora reached over and took my hand. You played a dangerous game, my friend. But it worked. Your daughter came back, not just to you, but to herself. And you kept your dignity, your home, and your peace of mind intact. That's no small feat. I allowed myself a small, wry smile. Yes, but the greatest reward is seeing Angela finally appreciate what it means to have family, respect, and love that isn't earned by convenience, but by choice. Aurora's eyes softened. And now, finally, both of you can live openly, without secrets, without pretenses. She's learned, and you've protected her, without her ever knowing until the right moment. Yes, I said, feeling a quiet satisfaction settle over me. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones we teach with patience, timing, and a little bit of silent strategy. Angela will carry this with her for the rest of her life, and she'll never forget it. Or me. Aurora shook her head again, half laughing, half in awe. You are something else, Antonia Brooks. Terrible, brilliant, and utterly unstoppable. I laughed quietly, letting the sound mix with the warm afternoon sun spilling into the kitchen. Perhaps, I said, but at the end of the day, it's just love. A mother's love, the kind that never gives up, even when it has to wait for someone to be ready to receive it. Aurora raised her teacup in a small toast. To love, patience, and daughters who finally learn their lessons. I clinked my cup gently against hers. To love, patience, and daughters who finally learn. And for the first time in months, I felt a serene certainty. Angela had returned, not just to me, but to herself. And we would both move forward, stronger, wiser, and unshakably united. I would never have discovered who I truly am. I would still be living in a world built on appearances and dependence, believing that happiness came from the things money could buy. But now, I finally understand that freedom comes from self-respect and choice. I looked at her, my daughter, and for the first time in years, I saw the woman she was always meant to be. There was no bitterness in her eyes, no trace of the entitlement that had once defined her. Only peace. I'm proud of you, Angela, I said softly. More than I can express. She smiled, tears glistening but not falling. You know, Mom, for a long time I thought you were cruel. I thought you wanted to punish me. But now I see that what you did was the greatest act of love anyone has ever done for me. I reached out and took her hand. A mother's love isn't about protecting her child from pain, Angela. It's about helping her grow strong enough to face it and come out wiser on the other side. Angela nodded, gripping my hand tightly. I understand that now. You didn't save me from falling. You taught me how to stand up. For a while, we sat in silence, the kind that only comes between two people who have finally made peace with the past. Later that evening, we had dinner together, just the two of us. There was laughter, real laughter, echoing through the same walls that had once heard nothing but arguments and silence. The air felt lighter. For the first time in years, our home felt whole. As we cleared the table, Angela looked around thoughtfully. You know, Mom, I used to think this house was too small, too simple. Now it feels perfect. Every corner has a memory, every detail a story. It's not just a house. It's home. I smiled, feeling my heart swell with a warmth I hadn't known in a long time. It always was, Angela. You just had to find your way back to it. That night, after she went to bed, I stood by her door for a long time, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. The same girl who once ran away chasing illusions of glamour was now dreaming in peace under my roof again, not as a lost daughter, but as a woman reborn. In the days that followed, Angela began researching universities that offered social work programs. She attended community meetings, volunteered at local shelters, and slowly built a new life, one that reflected everything she had learned. Aurora often came by, bringing fresh bread or gossip from the neighborhood. One afternoon, as we sipped tea on the porch, she smiled knowingly. "So, Antonia, now that everything's settled, what will you do with all your fortune?" I chuckled softly. "For now, nothing. It's exactly where it needs to be, quietly helping my daughter rebuild her life." Aurora tilted her head. "And you, don't you deserve a little happiness for yourself after all this?" I looked toward the garden, where Angela was talking to a group of neighborhood women about organizing a food drive. The autumn light caught her hair, and she looked radiant, strong, compassionate, whole. "I already have my happiness," I said quietly. "I'm watching it grow right in front of me." Aurora smiled, squeezing my hand. "You did it, Antonia. You saved her." "No," I replied, my voice calm and sure. "She saved herself. I just gave her the chance." And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace, the deep, silent kind that comes when a long battle has finally been won. Angela had fallen, yes, but she had risen higher than ever before, and as her mother, I couldn't have asked for anything more, didn't deserve it, or when she hadn't yet learned responsibility. I had taken care of her by letting her face reality, stumble, struggle, and rise again stronger than before. It was a victory that was quiet but profound. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sounds of the neighborhood settling into night. I sipped my tea and smiled softly. Angela had become someone who could navigate life with her own wisdom, someone who would value her family, her work, and herself. She had grown in ways that money could never buy. The next morning, I heard her humming as she prepared breakfast. It was a light, cheerful sound that seemed to fill the entire house with warmth. I realized that the lesson she had learned wasn't just for her. It had reminded me of the power of patience, foresight, and love guided by wisdom. Over the following months, our lives settled into a rhythm that was both fulfilling and humbling. Angela's days were spent studying, volunteering, and working, but she carried herself with pride and dignity. She was learning the kind of success that doesn't just fill a bank account, but fills a life. And in her eyes, I saw gratitude, not just for what I had done, but for the life she had earned herself. One evening, Aurora visited, as she always did, bringing with her the warmth of friendship and the voice of reason. She looked at Angela and me with a smile that carried both understanding and admiration. "You two have changed so much," she said. "But I think what's most remarkable is that you've changed together as a family." I nodded. "Yes, Aurora. We've grown not by avoiding pain, but by facing it, and we did it together honestly and with love." Angela walked past the porch carrying a box of freshly baked bread for her neighbors, waving cheerfully. I watched her go, realizing that she was no longer just my daughter. She was a person who understood responsibility, compassion, and the quiet power of integrity. Sitting back in my chair, I whispered to the stars above, "Robert, we did it. We both did it right." And as the night embraced our home, I knew that the hard lessons, the struggles, and the tears had all led to something far more valuable than wealth or comfort. They had led to understanding, to resilience, and to a love that was deep, unshakable, and forever earned. Angela had finally learned that life's true treasures are not inherited, bought, or given. They are built, piece by piece, through effort, wisdom, and the courage to rise after every fall. And in that, I found my peace. See the final image of a sunset over the ocean, the same ocean that had witnessed decades of our family's memories. The waves moved gently, as if echoing the rhythm of our story, sometimes turbulent, sometimes calm, but always moving forward. Angela stood beside me, watching the horizon. There was peace in her eyes, the kind that only comes after a long journey through pain, learning, and redemption. I realized then that our story wasn't just about loss or forgiveness. It was about rebirth. The beach house stood there, not as a monument to what we once had, but as a promise of what was still to come. It would soon be filled with laughter, hope, and the voices of women starting over, just like Angela once had. It would become a place of healing, a bridge between past wounds and future possibilities. I placed my hand on Angela's shoulder and said softly, "This is what your father would have wanted, a home that keeps giving, even when we're gone." Angela smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "Then let's make it happen, Mom. Let's turn our story into hope for others." The screen slowly faded to black as the waves continued to roll in and the golden light of dusk shimmered across the water. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to share your thoughts below. I'd love to know which part spoke to you the most. Your support means the world and helps bring more heartfelt stories like The Lesson of the Beach House. Thank you for listening, wherever in the world you are. And remember, sometimes love teaches through silence, and strength is born in forgiveness.